The bulldozer's engine roared to life as Sarah watched her dream pool crumble into concrete chunks. Behind her, Karen's shrill voice cut through the morning air. You can't destroy my view. But when the sheriff arrived with handcuffs, it wasn't Sarah who'd be taken away. Because sometimes, the person screaming about property rights is the one who's been stealing all along. And Karen's secret was about to surface with the last of the pool water. The morning sun cast long shadows across Sarah Chen's backyard as she stood beside the excavator, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The massive machine sat silent, waiting like a metal predator, ready to devour the crystal blue swimming pool that had been her pride and joy for the past 8 years. You sure about this, Mrs. Chen? Jake Morrison, the demolition contractor, adjusted his hard hat and squinted at the pristine pool. Seems like a shame to tear down something this nice. Sarah nodded, though her throat felt tight. I'm sure. She wasn't, really. But the divorce settlement had left her with a choice: sell the house or find a way to afford the mortgage on her teacher's salary. The pool maintenance alone was eating through her budget like acid through metal. Insurance, chemicals, the monthly cleaning service, the heating bills that spiked every winter when she tried to keep it swimmable year-round, it all had to go. The new landscaping will be beautiful, she said, more to convince herself than Jake. Native plants, a vegetable garden, maybe a small patio for reading. Jake shrugged and climbed into the excavator's cab. Your property, your call. As the engine rumbled to life, Sarah caught movement in her peripheral vision. Karen Whitmore's bleach-blonde head appeared over the pristine white fence that separated their properties, her face already twisted into the expression Sarah had come to dread, lips pursed, nostrils flared, eyes blazing with righteous indignation. What the hell do you think you're doing? Karen's voice could have shattered glass. Sarah forced a polite smile. Good morning, Karen. I'm having the pool removed. You can't do that. Actually, I can. It's my property. Karen's manicured fingers gripped the fence post so hard her knuckles went white. She was impeccably dressed even at 7 in the morning. Pressed khakis, a polo shirt that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly grocery budget, and enough jewelry to fund a small country's defense budget. That pool is part of the neighborhood's character. It's vandalism. Sarah set her coffee cup on the patio table and walked closer to the fence. Karen, with all due respect, what I do with my backyard is none of your business. None of my business. Karen's voice pitched higher, entering the range that made neighborhood dogs howl. That pool is the centerpiece of my view. I bought this house specifically because of that view. You're destroying my property value. Your view. Sarah felt heat rising in her chest. Karen, you don't own the view from your house. You own your property, I own mine. Jake had shut off the excavator and was watching the exchange with the expression of a man who'd seen this movie before. Neighborhood. Disputes were apparently part of the demolition business. Don't you dare talk to me about property rights. Karen jabbed a finger toward Sarah. I know exactly what you're doing. This is revenge because I complained about your sprinkler system hitting my roses. Sarah blinked. This has nothing to do with your roses, Karen. I'm removing the pool because I can't afford to maintain it anymore. Liar. The word hung in the air like a slap. Sarah felt her cheeks burn. In the 18 months since her divorce, she'd endured plenty of humiliation, signing papers that divided her life into neat legal categories, moving from a 4-bedroom house to a tiny rental while the divorce was finalized, watching her ex-husband drive away in his new Tesla with his 24-year-old girlfriend. But somehow, Karen's accusation felt like the final straw. Excuse me. You heard me. This is spite, pure and simple. You're destroying that pool to hurt me, and I won't stand for it. Jake cleared his throat. Ladies, I've got a schedule to keep. Mrs. Chen, do you want me to proceed or proceed? Sarah said firmly. Stop. Karen's voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare touch that pool. Karen, you need to back away from my property line. I'm calling the HOA. I'm calling the city. I'm calling my lawyer. You do that. Sarah turned to Jake. Please continue. The excavator roared back to life, and Jake maneuvered the massive arm toward the pool's shallow end. Sarah watched, her heart pounding with a mixture of grief and defiance. This pool had hosted dozens of birthday parties, summer barbecues, lazy Sunday afternoons when she and David were still happy. Emma had learned to swim in this pool, had brought friends over for pool parties that lasted until the fireflies came out. But those days were gone, dissolved like chlorine in water. The excavator's bucket bit into the concrete with a sound like breaking bones. Chunks of pool deck crashed into the water, sending up sprays that caught the morning light like liquid diamonds. Stop! Karen's scream was so loud that Mrs. Patterson from 3 houses down opened her door to investigate. "You're destroying my property." Sarah spun around. "Your property? Karen, that's my pool. The view belongs to everyone. It's part of the neighborhood ambience. You can't just—" "Actually, I can." Sarah's voice was steel quiet now. "And I am." Karen's face had gone from red to purple. "Fine. Fine. If you want to play hardball, we'll play hardball." She pulled out her phone and stabbed at the screen with a manicured finger. "I'm calling the sheriff. What you're doing is illegal destruction of property value, and I won't tolerate it." Sarah felt a chill despite the warming morning air. "Karen, you can't call the sheriff because I'm removing something from my own property." "Watch me." The next few minutes passed in a surreal blur. Karen paced along the fence line, speaking rapidly into her phone, gesturing wildly at the pool where Jake continued his methodical destruction. Sarah tried to focus on the positive, the money she'd save, the easier maintenance, the possibility of actually growing something beautiful in that space. But Karen's voice cut through every rational thought. "Yes, officer, I need someone out here immediately. My neighbor is destroying property and it's affecting the entire neighborhood's home values. This is economic vandalism." Sarah pulled out her own phone and called her sister Lisa. "I need you to come over. Karen's having a complete meltdown. And she's called the sheriff." "The sheriff? Sarah, what did you do?" "I'm having my pool removed." "And that's illegal how?" "According to Karen, I'm destroying her view and committing economic vandalism." Lisa's laugh was sharp. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Don't let that psycho intimidate you." By the time the sheriff's cruiser pulled into Sarah's driveway, a small crowd had gathered. Mrs. Patterson stood on her porch with her arms crossed. The Hendersons from across the street had brought folding chairs, as if this were dinner theater. Even old Mr. Kowalski had emerged from his house for the first time in months, leaning heavily on his walker but clearly not wanting to miss the show. Sheriff Tom Brennan climbed out of his patrol car with the weary expression of a man who'd been dealing with neighborhood disputes for 23 years. He was tall and graying, with kind eyes that had seen too much human foolishness to be surprised by anything anymore. "Morning, Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Whitmore." He nodded to each woman in turn. "I understand there's some kind of property dispute." Karen rushed over to him like a heat-seeking missile. "Officer, thank God you're here. She's destroying property that affects my home value. She's doing it out of spite because I complained about her sprinkler system." Sheriff Brennan looked at the pool, where Jake had paused his work to watch the drama unfold. "Mrs. Chen, is this your pool on your property?" "Yes, sir." "And you're having it removed because—" "I can't afford to maintain it anymore." Brennan nodded and turned to Karen. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm not sure what law you think is being broken here. A homeowner has the right to modify their own property as long as they follow local building codes and HOA regulations." Karen's mouth fell open. But the view. My property value." You don't have a legal right to a view across someone else's property. And even if removing the pool affects your property value, that's not a criminal matter. This is outrageous." Karen's voice hit a pitch that made nearby birds take flight. "I pay taxes. I vote. I demand protection from this kind of harassment." Harassment. Sarah couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Karen, I'm not harassing you. I'm improving my own property." "Improving? You call this improving?" Karen gestured wildly. "At the half-destroyed pool. You're turning the neighborhood into a ghetto." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Around the growing crowd of neighbors, she could see expressions of shock and disapproval, but whether they were directed at Karen's outburst or at her pool removal, she couldn't tell. Sheriff Brennan's expression hardened slightly. Mrs. Whitmore, I think you need to calm down and go back to your house. Mrs. Chen isn't breaking any laws. I want to file a complaint. I want a restraining order. I want what you want. Brennan interrupted, is to go home and let your neighbor make her own decisions about her own property. Karen's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on a color that reminded Sarah of raw hamburger meat. This ISN. 3 hours later, Sarah sat in her kitchen surrounded by a hurricane of paperwork. Every document from the pool installation 8 years ago was spread across her dining table like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that refused to form a complete picture. Building permits, contractor receipts, insurance forms, and buried somewhere in the chaos, the original property survey that David had commissioned. Lisa Chen Martinez had arrived with coffee and moral support, her lawyer instincts kicking in the moment she saw the legal documents scattered across the table. Tell me again what Karen's survey shows. Sarah held up the photocopy Sheriff Brennan had made before returning the original to Karen. According to this, our property line runs 3 feet closer to the house than we thought, which would put part of the pool deck and the entire shallow end on Karen's side of the boundary. But that doesn't make sense. Look. Lisa pulled out. The original survey from 2016, its edges yellowed with age. This clearly shows the pool within your property boundaries. There's a 15-foot setback from the property line to the pool edge. Sarah traced the boundary line with her finger. The 2 surveys might as well have been describing different planets. One of these has to be wrong. Or one of them is fake. Lisa's voice was grim. I've seen this before in property disputes. People manipulate surveys to strengthen their legal position. But Karen got hers from Pemberton and Associates. They are legit. They did the Hendersons' property when they put in their fence. Lisa studied Karen's survey more carefully, pulling out a magnifying glass she kept in her purse for reading contracts. Sarah, look at this. The stamp says this survey was completed last month, but look at the date on the property description. Sarah leaned closer. October 15, 2023. Right. But look at the survey date at the bottom of the page. November 3, 2024. Sarah felt her stomach clench. That's last week. So Karen commissioned a survey last month, but the surveyor dated it over a year ago? That's either a clerical error or something much more suspicious. Before Sarah could respond, her doorbell rang. Through the window, she could see a tall man in a business suit standing on her porch, briefcase in hand. Mrs. Chen. I'm Bradley Pemberton from Pemberton and Associates. I understand there's been some confusion about a property survey. Sarah's heart leaped. Mr. Pemberton. Yes. Please come in. We were just trying to figure out, before we go any further, Pemberton interrupted, stepping into her foyer. I need to clarify something. The survey that's being circulated with my company's name on it? We didn't create it. The world seemed to pause. Sarah heard Lisa's sharp intake of breath behind her. I'm sorry, what? Pemberton opened his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. Mrs. Whitmore contacted my office this morning, demanding that we validate a survey she claims we performed. When my secretary couldn't find any record of it, she called me directly. He handed Sarah an official document. This is the actual survey we performed for Mrs. Whitmore's property 3 weeks ago. Sarah's hands trembled as she studied the legitimate survey. The property boundaries it showed were identical to her original 2016 survey. The pool sat squarely on her own land, with a comfortable buffer zone on all sides. Then the survey she showed the sheriff is a forgery, a sophisticated one. I'll grant you, but a fake nonetheless. Someone took our legitimate survey and altered the boundary lines, then backdated it to make it look like historical documentation. Lisa stepped forward, her expression sharp. Mr. Pemberton, would you be willing to testify to that effect? Absolutely. What Mrs. Whitmore has done is fraud, and it's also trademark infringement. She's using our company letterhead to perpetuate a lie. He pulled out another document. I took the liberty of filing a complaint with the sheriff's department before coming here. Deputy Martinez should be arriving at Mrs. Whitmore's house right about. The sound of a car door slamming echoed from a street, followed immediately by Karen's voice raised in indignation. This is harassment. I'm being persecuted for trying to protect my property values. Sarah, Lisa, and Pemberton moved to the front window. In the street, Deputy Martinez was walking toward Karen's front door, a folded paper in her hand. Karen stood on her porch, still in her perfectly pressed outfit, but her composure was beginning to crack around the edges. "Mrs. Whitmore, Deputy," Martinez called out, "I need to speak with you about a fraudulent document you presented to Sheriff Brennan this morning." "Fraudulent? That's ridiculous. I paid good money for that survey." "The surveying company has no record of performing any work for you that matches the document you presented. I'm going to need you to explain where you obtained this survey." Sarah watched as Karen's face cycled through several expressions: confusion, anger, and something that looked suspiciously like panic. I got it from my files. I've had it for months." According to the surveying company, the document contains their forged letterhead and signature. "That's a felony, Mrs. Whitmore." Karen's voice pitched higher. "I didn't forge anything. Someone must have made a mistake." "Then you won't mind if we take a look at your computer and see if we can figure out where this document originated?" The panic on Karen's face was no longer subtle. "You can't just search my property without a warrant." "Actually, I can if you consent to the search, unless you have something to hide." Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and disbelief wash over her. Karen Whitmore, the woman who attended every HOA meeting, who called the city about dandelions in her neighbors' yards, who prided herself on being the moral guardian of Maple Street, was apparently a document forger. "I need to call my lawyer," Karen said, her voice smaller now. "That's your right, but in the meantime, I'm going to need you to come with me to answer some questions about this survey." Sarah watched as Karen was escorted to the patrol car, her perfect composure finally cracking completely. Neighbors began emerging from their houses like prairie dogs after a storm, whispers spreading up and down the street faster than gossip. At a high school reunion, Mr. Pemberton cleared his throat. "Mrs. Chen, I'm truly sorry about this situation. If there's anything my company can do to help resolve the confusion." "Actually, there is." Sarah turned away from the window. "I'd like to understand how someone could forge a survey convincing enough to fool a sheriff." "It wouldn't be that difficult, unfortunately. Most people aren't familiar with the technical details of survey documents. Change a few measurements, adjust some boundary lines, print it on official-looking paper, and most people would accept it at face value." Lisa was studying the forged survey with renewed interest. But why would Karen go to all this trouble? What does she gain by stopping Sarah from removing her pool? Sarah thought about that question as she watched the patrol car disappear around the corner. Why would Karen forge documents to prevent a pool removal? It wasn't like the pool was on Karen's property. According to the real surveys, it was clearly on Sarah's side of the boundary line. "The view," she said suddenly. "What?" Karen kept talking about the view, about how the pool was part of her view from her backyard. Sarah walked to her back door and stepped onto the patio. From there, she could see directly into Karen's backyard, through a gap in the fence. What she saw made her stomach drop. Karen's backyard wasn't just visible from Sarah's property, it was completely exposed. And there, gleaming in the afternoon sun like a guilty secret, was a massive hot tub surrounded by obviously new decking. "Lisa," Sarah called, "you need to see this." Her sister joined her on the patio, and her sharp intake of breath confirmed what Sarah was thinking. That hot tub wasn't there a month ago. No, it wasn't. And I bet if we check with the city, there's no permit for it either. Lisa pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. "Sarah, I think we just figured out why Karen was so desperate. To stop your pool demolition. She needed a distraction. More than that, she needed to establish some kind of legal precedent about property modifications requiring neighbor approval. If she could get the authorities to stop you from removing your pool without neighbor consent, she could argue the same principle should apply to anyone questioning her hot tub installation." Sarah stared at Karen's backyard, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with almost audible snaps. She figured if she could frame the pool removal as some kind of neighborhood property dispute, everyone would be so focused on our drama that no one would notice her unpermitted construction project. And if she could get you arrested for property destruction, she'd be seen as the victim instead of the perpetrator. The sound of another car door slamming drew their attention back to the street. Sheriff Brennan was walking towards Sarah's front door, his expression unreadable. Sarah met him at the door before he could knock. "Sheriff, I understand there's been some new developments." "You could say that." Brennan's tone was dry. "Mrs. Whitmore is in custody, and we've confiscated her computer. Turns out she's quite the document forger. But that's not why I'm here." Sarah felt her heart rate spike. "Oh. We ran the address through our system while we were booking her. Turns out there have been several anonymous complaints filed against this address over the past 6 months. Noise violations, property maintenance issues, suspicious activity. All filed by someone who refused to give their name." Sarah couldn't sleep. At 3:17 a.m., she stood at her bedroom window, staring across the darkened yards toward Karen's house. The anonymous photo was burned into her memory, that disturbed patch of earth, carefully concealed beneath new sod and strategically placed garden decorations. She'd spent hours on her laptop, researching everything she could find about Karen Whitmore. The woman had lived on Maple Street for 12 years, moving in shortly after her divorce from a man named Richard Whitmore. Before that, public records showed a gap: no addresses, no employment history, nothing for nearly 3 years. It was as if Karen had simply materialized on Maple Street with a new identity and a suspiciously clean slate. Lisa had gone home around midnight, but not before making Sarah promise to call if she discovered anything else. "Don't go poking around her property," she'd warned. "If there's really something buried there, you need to let the police handle it." But the police were focused on document forgery and unpermitted construction. They had no reason to start excavating Karen's backyard based on an anonymous photo. Sarah's phone buzzed on the nightstand. Another text from the unknown number: "Meet me at Riverside Park, North Parking Lot, 6 a.m. Come alone. I have more information about what Karen's been hiding." Her hands trembled as she typed back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "Someone who's been watching her a lot longer than you have. Someone who knows what happened to Richard." Richard? Karen's ex-husband. Sarah's internet searches had turned up almost nothing about him, just a brief mention in the divorce filing and then silence. No social media presence, no forwarding address, no death certificate. As if he'd simply vanished. At 5:45 a.m., Sarah sat in her Honda Civic in the deserted parking lot at Riverside Park, her hands wrapped around a travel mug of coffee that had already gone cold. The autumn morning was crisp, with fog rolling off the river and obscuring the jogging paths in ghostly shrouds. A figure emerged from the mist, an elderly man walking with a cane, his face weathered but his eyes sharp and intelligent. He approached her car and tapped on the passenger window. "Mrs. Chen. I'm Walter Kowalski. I live 3 houses down from you." Sarah recognized him as the man who'd emerged to watch Karen's arrest, though she'd never spoken to him before. She unlocked the passenger door and he settled into the seat with a grunt of effort. "Mr. Kowalski, you sent the photo." "I did. Along with a few others." He pulled out a manila envelope and set it on his lap. "I've been documenting Karen's activities for the past 4 years, ever since I started suspecting what really happened to her husband." "What do you mean, what happened to him?" Walter opened the envelope and pulled out a series of photographs, all taken from his upstairs window with a telephoto lens. "Richard Whitmore didn't just disappear after their divorce, Mrs. Chen. He never left the neighborhood at all." The first photo showed Karen and Richard in their backyard, engaged in what looked like a heated argument. The timestamp showed it was taken 3 years ago, nearly a year after their official divorce date. "He was supposed to have moved to Arizona," Walter continued. "That's what Karen told everyone. Said he'd found a job in Phoenix and wanted a fresh start. But I kept seeing his car parked in her garage late at night." The next photo showed Richard's silver BMW in Karen's driveway at 2:30 a.m. Then another, taken a week later, showing the same car. "I figured they were trying to reconcile, maybe work things out privately. None of my business, really. But then the arguments got worse." Walter handed her a photo that made her stomach clench. Karen and Richard were clearly fighting, their body language aggressive and hostile. Richard appeared to be backing away from Karen, who was holding something in her hand, something that gleamed metallically in the porch light. "Kitchen knife," Sarah whispered. That's what I thought. This photo was taken on March 15th, 3 years ago. It was the last time I ever saw Richard Whitmore alive. Sarah's hands shook as she studied the image. Did you call the police? With what? A photo of a couple arguing. Happens every day. But I kept watching and I kept taking pictures. He showed her the next photograph. This was taken 2 days later. Karen was in her backyard at dawn, digging. She was still in her pajamas, her hair disheveled, her face streaked with what could have been tears or sweat. The hole she was creating was roughly 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. My God, Sarah breathed. She worked for 6 hours straight. Dug that hole, filled it back in, then spent the rest of the week installing new landscaping over the spot. Told everyone she was putting in a memorial garden for her grandmother. The final photograph showed the completed memorial garden, a neat rectangle of flowers and decorative stones, exactly where the disturbed earth had been in the anonymous photo Sarah had received. But why didn't you report this? If you suspected. Suspected what, exactly? That my neighbor killed her ex-husband and buried him in the backyard. Walter's laugh was bitter. Mrs. Chen, I'm a 78-year-old retired accountant with a heart condition. Who would believe me? And what proof did I really have? Sarah studied the photographs again, her mind racing. The hot tub installation. She put it right over the memorial garden. Convenient, isn't it? Makes it nearly impossible for anyone to dig in that area without a very good reason. And if anyone ever gets suspicious about the memorial garden, well, it's been moved to make room for home improvements. We have to take this to the police. Walter shook his head. I tried that 2 years ago. Sheriff Brennan was polite but skeptical. Said without more concrete evidence there wasn't much he could do. Lots of people have arguments with their ex-spouses. Lots of people do landscaping projects. But now, with everything that's happened, the forged documents, the harassment campaign, now they might actually listen. Walter gathered up the photographs. Especially if someone were to find a reason to look more closely at that hot tub installation. Sarah's phone rang, making them both jump. It was Jake, the demolition contractor. Mrs. Chen, I can be there in an hour to finish the pool removal if you're ready. Actually, Jake, before you do that, I have a question. How deep would you need to dig to install a hot tub? Depends on the model, but usually about 4 feet down, sometimes 5 if you want proper drainage and electrical access. Why? Sarah looked at Walter, who was nodding grimly. Just curious. I'll see you in an hour. After Jake hung up, Walter turned to her with an expression of grim satisfaction. 4 to 5 feet. Perfect depth to disturb anything that might be buried 6 feet down. You think Karen realized that when she had the hot tub installed? I think Karen is a very smart woman who's been playing a very dangerous game. She probably figured the hot tub would provide permanent protection for whatever's buried there. But now that she's in custody for document forgery, the city's going to want to inspect that unpermitted installation. Sarah felt pieces clicking into place. That's why she was so desperate to create a distraction with my pool removal. She needed something big enough to occupy Sheriff Brennan's attention while the hot tub inspection got delayed or forgotten. And it almost worked. If you hadn't insisted on verifying that survey, she might have gotten away with it. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching the fog lift off the river as the sun climbed higher. Early joggers were beginning to appear on the paths, and the normal sounds of a suburban morning were replacing the eerie quiet of dawn. Mr. Kowalski, why are you showing me this now? Why not take it directly to Sheriff Brennan yourself? The old man sighed. Because I'm dying, Mrs. Chen. Pancreatic cancer. I've got maybe 3 months left, and I want to see justice done before I go. But more than that, I've watched you this past year, dealing with your divorce, struggling to keep your house, trying to rebuild your life. Karen's been targeting you specifically because she sees you as vulnerable. She's been hoping you'd crack under the pressure and move away. Move away? Why would she care if I moved? Walter pointed toward Karen's house, barely visible through the morning mist. Because you're the only neighbor with a clear view into her backyard. Everyone else is blocked by fences or landscaping or the angle of their houses. If you moved, she'd have complete privacy for whatever she's been planning. What do you think she's been planning? I think she's been getting ready to move Richard's remains. The hot tub was never meant to be permanent, it was just a way to buy time while she figured out a more permanent solution. Maybe she was planning to renovate her whole backyard, dig up everything and start fresh. Or maybe she was planning to sell the house and move somewhere new. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. But then I refused to move. I kept fighting to stay in my house, kept maintaining my view of her property. And that made you a problem she had to solve. First with the harassment campaign, then with the forged documents. She was escalating, getting more desperate. And more dangerous. Walter nodded grimly. Karen Whitmore is a woman who's already killed once to protect her secrets. The question is, what's she willing to do to keep protecting them? Sarah's phone buzzed with another text, this time from Sheriff Brennan. City Inspector will be at Karen's house at 10 a.m. to examine the hot tub installation. Thought you might want to know, given your interest in property line disputes. She showed the Ms. Sarah sat frozen in her car, staring at the BMW that shouldn't exist. According to everyone in the neighborhood, including Karen herself, Richard's car had been driven to Arizona 3 years ago when he supposedly moved for a fresh start. But there it was, gleaming silver in the morning sun, license plate intact, looking as if it had been meticulously maintained in someone's garage for 36 months. Her phone rang, making her jump so violently she nearly dropped it. Sarah, get out of there right now. It was Walter's voice, sharp with urgency. I'm watching from my window. Karen's moving around her backyard with some kind of equipment. Looks like she's trying to do something to the hot tub before the inspector arrives. Sarah looked toward Karen's property and caught a glimpse of movement through the gap in the fence. What kind of equipment? Can't tell for sure, but it's electronic. Maybe some kind of detector or scanner. Sarah, I think she's trying to locate exactly where. The line went dead. Sarah tried calling back, but Walter's phone went straight to voicemail. She texted him instead, "Are you okay?" But no response came. At 9:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the city inspector was scheduled to arrive, Sarah made a decision that would have terrified her a week ago. She grabbed Walter's envelope of photographs and walked directly to Karen's front door. Karen answered on the first knock, as if she'd been waiting. She looked nothing like the perfectly composed woman who'd been screaming about property rights 2 days ago. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and her clothes looked like she'd slept in them. But her eyes were alert and calculating. "Sarah," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How nice of you to visit. I was just thinking about you." "I bet you were. We need to talk, Karen." "Of course. Come in." Karen stepped aside, gesturing toward her living room with exaggerated politeness. "I was just making coffee. Would you like some?" Sarah stepped into the house, every instinct screaming at her to run. But Walter was right. This had to end today. "I know about Richard." Karen's smile flickered for just a moment. "Richard? My ex-husband? What about him?" "I know he never moved to Arizona. I know he's been buried in your backyard for 3 years. Karen's laugh was high and brittle. "That's quite an imagination you have. Richard is living happily in Phoenix. We email occasionally. Then why is his car in your driveway?" The smile vanished completely. Karen's face went blank, as if someone had suddenly switched off a light behind her eyes. "I think you should leave now. The city inspector will be here in 10 minutes to examine your hot tub installation. When they start digging to check the electrical and plumbing work, what do you think they're going to find?" Karen's hand moved to the kitchen counter, where a block of knives sat within easy reach. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I have photographs, Karen. Pictures. Of you and Richard fighting the night he disappeared. Pictures of you digging in your backyard the next morning. Pictures of you installing that memorial garden right over the spot where you buried him." Karen's fingers wrapped around the handle of a large carving knife. "Those are lies. The police are already suspicious about the document forgery and the false complaints. How long do you think it'll take them to connect the dots when they find Richard's body under your hot tub? There is no body. Karen's voice cracked like a whip. Richard left. He moved away. He started a new life. Then where are the emails you supposedly exchanged with him? Where are the phone records? Where's the paper trail, Karen? Karen pulled the knife from the block, its blade catching the light from her perfectly clean windows. Get out of my house. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text. Without taking her eyes off Karen, she glanced at the screen. It was from Sheriff Brennan. City Inspector found human remains under hot tub. Karen Whitmore's house is now a crime scene. Stay away from the area. Too late for that advice. They found him, Sarah said quietly. Karen's face went white. That's impossible. He's not. They can't have. It's over, Karen. The knife trembled in Karen's hand. You don't understand. You don't know what he was like. What he put me through. So you killed him. I defended myself. The words exploded out of her. He came back that night, drunk and violent. Said he wanted his share of the house value, wanted to renegotiate the divorce settlement. He had a gun, Sarah. He was threatening to kill me if I didn't give him what he wanted. Sarah felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, but it died when she remembered the weeks of harassment, the forged documents, the systematic campaign to destroy her life. Self-defense is one thing, Karen. But covering it up? Burying him in your backyard? Harassing your neighbors to keep them from discovering the truth? That's not self-defense. That's murder and conspiracy. I panicked. I didn't know what else to do. Who would have believed me? A bitter ex-wife claiming self-defense? I would have spent the rest of my life in prison. So instead, you decided to spend the rest of your life covering it up. And when that got complicated, you decided to destroy other people's lives to protect your secret. Karen's laugh was wild, unhinged. Other people's lives? Sarah, you have no idea what I've sacrificed to keep this secret. Do you think I wanted to live next to a crime scene for 3 years? Do you think I enjoyed watching my property value plummet because I couldn't sell the house and move away? So you tried to drive me away instead. You were supposed to crack. The divorce, the financial pressure, the harassment. You were supposed to give up and move somewhere else. But you just kept fighting, kept staying, kept being able to see into my backyard. Sarah heard sirens in the distance, growing closer. The police are coming, Karen. It's over. No. Karen raised the knife higher. No, it's not over. If I'm going down, I'm not going down alone. She lunged forward, the blade aimed at Sarah's chest. But 3 years of yoga classes and weekend hiking had kept Sarah in better shape than Karen's sedentary lifestyle of HOA meetings and property value obsession. She twisted aside, and Karen's momentum carried her past, sending her crashing into her own coffee table. The knife skidded across the hardwood floor as Karen struggled to get up, her perfect living room now chaos around them. Sarah dove for the knife, her fingers closing around the handle just as Karen grabbed her ankle. You ruined everything. Karen screamed, clawing at Sarah's legs. Everything was perfect until you refused to leave. Sarah kicked free and scrambled toward the front door, the knife still in her hand. But Karen was faster than she looked, tackling Sarah from behind and sending them both tumbling onto the front porch just as Sheriff Brennan's patrol car screeched to a halt in the driveway. Freeze! Both of you, hands where I can see them. Sarah dropped the knife and raised her hands, grateful to see Brennan's familiar face. Karen lay on the porch beside her, no longer fighting, her perfect facade finally cracked beyond repair. She killed him, Sarah gasped. She killed Richard and buried him in the backyard. Brennan approached cautiously, his weapon drawn but pointed at the ground. We know. The inspector found the remains 20 minutes ago. Mrs. Whitmore, you're under arrest for murder. As Brennan read Karen her rights, Sarah noticed Walter Kowalski standing on his front porch, his cane in one hand and his camera in the other. He gave her a small nod of acknowledgement, the look of a man who'd finally seen justice served after years of patient watching and waiting. The crime scene team arrived within the hour, transforming Maple Street into something out of a television. Procedural. Yellow tape, forensic equipment, reporters gathering at the police barriers. Sarah watched from her living room window as they carefully excavated the area under Karen's hot tub, revealing secrets that had been hidden for 3 years. Lisa arrived with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine. "I saw the news," she said, settling beside Sarah on the couch. "Are you okay?" "I think so. It's just surreal. Yesterday, my biggest problem was affording pool maintenance. Today, I helped solve a murder." "You did more than solve it. You ended it." Karen was escalating, getting more desperate. If this had gone on much longer, who knows what she might have done. Sarah thought about the knife, about the wild look in Karen's eyes, about the 3 years of careful deception that had finally collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. The crazy thing is, if she'd just left me alone, I probably never would have found out. I was so focused on my own problems, the divorce, the finances, keeping the house. I wasn't paying attention to what was happening next door. But she couldn't leave you alone. That's what guilty people do. They create the very attention they're trying to avoid. On the television, the local news was running the story with barely contained excitement. "Murder uncovered in suburban paradise" scrolled across the bottom of the screen while a reporter stood in front of Karen's house, explaining how a simple pool removal had unraveled a 3-year-old murder cover-up. Sarah's phone had been ringing all day with calls from journalists, but she'd ignored them all. This wasn't her story to tell, it was Richard's. And Walter's. And in a strange way, it was Karen's too. As evening approached and the crime scene team finished their work, Sarah found herself standing in her backyard again, looking at her half-destroyed pool. Tomorrow, Jake would return to finish the demolition. By next week, there would be nothing left but dirt and possibility. Boo!